Folks, we have to do one more video before we close the carp topic and move to catfish and crappie in September. Because, as simple as carp rigs are, and this is Exhibit A here, the simplest rig in the world, I rarely see these rigs tied correctly. Like, for example, this rig here. This is your mainline, okay? This is a 20-cent spring feeder. And this is a hook. What kind of mistake can you do here? First of all, make sure you use monofilament for your mainline, okay? I know you see braid right here, and I do use a little bit of braid above all of my feeders on all of my rigs, but I'm going to talk more about that in a second. But on all of my carp rods, I have nothing but monofilament right now. In the past, I did experiment with braid and fluorocarbon as mainline, but I concluded that they just don't work well for carp fishing, and you will inevitably lose fish just because of your mainline if you use anything other than monofilament. The reason for that is that carp is very strong and the average size is pretty big. It's like 10-12 carp is average, at least for United States. And it also takes a very long time for carp to get tired, more than any other freshwater fish for sure. And so you have this 10-pound carp that's fighting for 10-12 minutes, and with time, the hook begins to cut a hole in the mouth of the carp. To make this issue worse, the flesh of the mouth of the carp is very soft, and the hook just begins to cut a hole in the mouth that gets bigger and bigger the longer you fight the fish. So eventually the hook just comes off through the hole and just cuts the flesh and comes out of the carp. And you think the carp spit it out and you blame your hooks that they're not sharp or stuff. But the truth is, if you fight the carp very long, you just tore off the mouth of the fish. So you have to be patient when you fight carp, and using monofilament as your main line really helps. For feeder, I actually don't care what you use. I made a video about feeders, watch that video, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. This is probably the best feeder for beginner anglers just because it has nothing to break. But I don't care much what kind of feeder you use. But if you use this feeder, you don't even have a swivel. Look at this. I mean, there are no components here. This is your main line, monofilament again. This is your spring feeder. And here you just tie a hook. So yeah, that's about the feeders. Get whatever you want. That's not critical, and I don't consider choosing the feeder an error. I consider choosing braid as mainline an error, but I don't consider choosing whatever feeder you want an error. For the hooks, however, I actually don't care very much about hooks either, so long as you have a hook that roughly looks like this. Okay, so as long as you have a J hook with a kind of classical, normal classical shape, something like this. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but something like this. I would not consider this an error either. Okay, it's not going to be as good as this hook here, but it's really not an error. It's not that critical. Carp will pull very hard and it will set the hook. The one error that I do see here is people use circle hooks. For the love of Jesus, just don't use a circle hook. Anything else here will be okay. Circle hooks don't work for carp. They don't even always work for catfish. I don't know, on average, of all of the catfish bites in the world, I don't know, probably half of them slip out. I have a video about that too, by the way. I'm gonna leave it in the description. I don't want this particular video to get too long, so if you want to find the problems with circle hooks, watch that video. But circle hooks don't work for carp. They will slip out of the carp mouth 9 out of 10 times, maybe 19 out of 20 times. Don't tell me you caught a carp with a circle hook. That's a false positive. Only because you caught one carp on a circle hook, it doesn't mean that they work. So, okay, I don't want to put any more negative energy into circle hooks. Just don't use a circle hook here and you will be fine, I promise you. Okay, then you have this leader here that connects the hook to the feeder, okay? If you don't know what to use, just use 50 or 65 pound braid, whatever brand you want. Daiwa J braid is my favorite. But whatever brand you want, and either dark green or dark brown or black color. Don't put here, you know, screaming high-vis colors, okay? But the more important thing here is not the material. The biggest problem is not the material that people choose, because most people do choose braid here in United States. In UK, I cannot help these people. They are beyond the point of help. But here in United States, they tend to use braid and they tend to use dark color that's not too high-vis. So the material is not the problem. The problem is the length. They always have too long a leader. And first I'm going to tell you why the perfect length for this hook leader is as long as you see here. And then I'll tell you probably why they use longer. Big problem with casting carp rigs is the hook getting tangled into the main line. Okay, so people cast, it gets tangled. Then they start to put stuff on the hook that dissolves into water to avoid tangles. But this only introduces other problems, because sometimes the stuff doesn't dissolve very fast. What if the water is cold? I mean, sometimes the stuff doesn't dissolve completely. Sometimes the stuff leaves a residue of taste onto your hook bait. Sometimes it still gets tangled. So putting these PVA, they're called PVA, the things that dissolve, putting these PVA items on the hook to prevent tangles, in my opinion, fixes one problem and introduces other problems. First of all, you have to wait until it dissolves first before a fish can bite it, right? But if your hook leader length is like this, how can it tangle in my case? Look at this feeder. All of the weight is here. You can rely, when I cast it, this thing will fly like this, for sure, just because this is the heaviest part of the feeder. Then what happens with the hook? Oh, my light went out. Give me a second to turn the light back on. Here we go. So as the feeder flies like this, the hook is reaching up to here, and it can almost tangle. It's already very difficult. However, remember, I have a little bit of pack bait around my feeder. Let's wrap my fingers around it, okay? But now it can no longer reach the main line. Do you see how simple the solution is? If your hook leader is short enough, it just cannot get around to the main line. So I don't need to put PVA, I don't need to wait for the PVA to dissolve. Just by the virtue of hook leader being short, I never get tangles. It drops like this, and I can get a bite immediately. And you can confirm this in my videos. I do get bites immediately, sometimes within a minute. So this is why the hook leader needs to be short, but there is actually another reason. When it's falling in the water, this is heavier than the hook, so it will fall kind of like this, and the hook will fall very close to the feeder, something like this. Now when a carp comes here, comes close, it will go like this, it will tilt his head down, and they start munching on the pack bait. And the mouth is like a vacuum cleaner, literally. Sometimes they will suck the hook bait, not even intentionally. They just suck stuff from the bottom. They taste it. If it doesn't taste right, they spit it out. And sometimes they will eat your hook bait just because it was close to the pack bait. But if your leader is 1 foot long and this hook is all the way over here, you lose the benefit of accidental, suckings of your hook bait. You know what I'm talking about, right? So this is another reason why the hook leader should be short. How short? It should be just short enough of getting back to the main line, considering your pack bait. Now this rig is very similar. Again, notice the hook, notice the hook leader length. Everything is right. It will be something like this. The only difference here is this feeder has many components, and one of these components is this swivel here. Okay, this tiny little swivel. I don't care for this swivel. I wish I could tie the hook to something here, because this swivel doesn't really swivel. It's just something to tie your hook to. But the problem with this now is once you get a carp and it's a long fight. Eventually, because this thing is heavy, it will come off the little swivel here. So one tip I have for you is this piece from here from the swivel and 2 feet up, do not make it your main line, because this feeder, going up and down your main line will chafe your main line, and you have to change it too often. So I recommend, again, 50-pound braid here that you can use forever. It will never get chafed from this kind of damage. And then on top of it, I tie a big swivel, a real swivel. You don't need big for the strength, but I tie a big one so it weighs a couple of grams. And so first of all, the first purpose of this swivel, you don't have to have it, but this is just a tip, okay? If you don't have this swivel here, when this starts sliding, it will go all the way up your main line. So it just creates issues. If you have the swivel, like this, the feeder cannot go more than 2 feet up your main line. That's the first advantage. Second advantage is carp are very spooky. Okay, so let's say I cast it like this and my feeder is all the way here. Let's say the feeder is all the way there. But now if you fish with tight line, the line will be kind of up in the water column. So a fish that swims here can touch the line and get spooked, and it will register false bites. But if you have a couple of grams of weight here from the swivel, now the swivel will drop on the bottom and the fish will swim above the line. And it's not going to get spooked, and it's not going to register a false bite. You can even put some weight here, kind of split shot or something, on top of the swivel for a little extra weight to make sure it drops on the bottom. But if you don't fish very tight lines, which I try not to use very tight line, I always have kind of a little bit of slack in my line, just to know that the swivel will fall to the bottom. But if you use very tight line, you're still gonna pull the swivel up in mid column. The British use a lead core leader for this particular piece of line from here to here, just for that purpose, to make sure it lays on the bottom. But I refuse to spend money on that crap. So just put yourself a nice swivel and a little split shot above it. That will keep this piece of the line here on the bottom. And one other reason is, Without me making the rig like this with additional line here, additional 2 feet of braid and a swivel, I would have to assemble this whole thing on the water. But right now, I can tie this whole thing at home like this. And then what I do is I put them in these little baggies, okay, all tied up with 2 feet of braid on top and a little swivel on top. And I put them in a Ziploc, and I have 2 Ziploc bags. One is for boilie and one is without a boilie. And I have these with me. And if you break off on the river, I just pull another one from the baggie and I tie this directly to my main line, you know, good to go in a second. So this is my tip for tying that rig. We're still not talking about boilies here, just regular rig, but I recommend tying it on 2 feet of 50-pound braid and with a swivel on top and not fish very tight line. Okay, now let's talk about boilies. Everything is the same. Again, you can see the hook leader, the length of the hook leader prevents it from getting tangled. This one is pretty short. This is an actual, you know, bait that I used. I never got a bite, but that lake is tough, man. You can catch a 40-pounder or a 30-pounder or nothing else. It has very few carp, but they're monsters. But this is an actual hook bait that I used. Everything is the same, like I said, a little piece of braid with a swivel on top, so the whole thing is kind of easy to assemble. This is already glued. The error that I see here is people don't attach this leader here where the hair, they don't attach it to the stem of the hook. Do you see how the hair is attached to the stem of the hook? The reason for that is this way, when the carp sucks the bait, it's pulling the hook like this. It's pulling the hook like this, and the hook will travel inside the mouth like this way, okay? And this is the right way to travel inside the mouth. Now, if this hair here is not attached to this part of the stem with something, there's many different ways. I just make a couple of loops with the braid around the stem. They're just a couple of loops. They're even, you can move them up or down wherever you want. You can adjust them. I'll make another video about how to tie a hair rig. Don't worry about it. It will be next year, but I'll make another video about that. But you need to, there is different ways. You can put some kind of tubing to hold it, but you have to attach the hair to this piece of the stem of the hook. Otherwise, if the hair is only attached here, when the carp sucks the bait, the hook will travel inside the mouth like this. Now, if the hook is moving into the mouth of the carp like this, you can see that's a problem. First of all, it's difficult to get inside. Carp has small mouth. Then it can go like this, or it can go in the wrong way. The hook has to enter the mouth of the carp like this. So if you use hair rig, it has to look like this, something like this. You can use whatever you want, tubing, but you have to use something like this. Okay, just one last tip and I'm ending this video, and it's for the pop-up hair rigs. Everything is just the same, as you can see. I'm still, you know, attaching the hair to the upper portion of the stem of the hook, so when the carp sucks the boilie, the hook enters the carp mouth the correct direction. It's about this little piece of lead that people put here to regulate how high off the bottom the boilie will suspend. You know, most people use regular crimpable split shots, but I find that I lose this all the time. Every fish I have to crimp another one, and if you try to crimp it too hard, then you risk, you know, cutting your line here. So that's not a good solution, and you can spend your money on, you know, the expensive stuff from carp stores. They sell putty and whatever. If you want to spend your money on that, go ahead, but I don't think you need to. I found these split shots to work really well. I buy them from eBay. 100 of them cost $3. These are inline split shots. They go on the line like this, okay? And then you just crimp it a little bit. You don't have to crimp this one very hard. And you can, if you don't crimp it very hard, you can kind of adjust it. You can, on the next cast, let it a little bit higher, a little bit lower. Up to you, but you will never lose this. And they are so cheap. So if you use pop-up boilies, I recommend go on eBay and get you one of these inline split shots, 0.4 grams, 0.5 grams, depending on the buoyancy of your boilies, but 0.4 grams work great for me. But this is the last tip of this video, guys. I know I didn't cover everything, but if you have some question for me, I'll be happy to answer it, so just drop it in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon with a crappie or catfish video. Bye bye.